Imagine being on a packed flight, settled into your seat with a $500 ticket, feeling pretty good about your journey. You look around at the other passengers, maybe even judging a few people by the way they dress, the way they sit, or the way they talk. It's a natural thing, right? Everyone does it. But what happens when you're the one being judged and you're hiding a secret that will leave everyone stunned? That's exactly what happened to one man on a routine flight. As the plane cruised at 30,000 feet, a group of passengers couldn't help but notice the man sitting in a first-class seat that, at first glance, seemed out of place. He didn't look like someone who could afford a ticket that expensive, and his demeanor didn't scream luxury. Some passengers whispered behind his back, making assumptions, dismissing him as just another regular traveler. But little did they know, that quiet man with the unassuming look wasn't just any passenger. As the flight went on, the whispers grew louder, but they were about to be silenced in the most shocking way possible. The man was about to reveal a game-changing secret that would make everyone rethink everything they thought they knew. As the plane touched down, he stood up, and the realization hit them like a ton of bricks. Who was this man really? What did he own? And how would his identity change the way they saw themselves? Stick around, because the truth is about to blow your mind. The man remained calm, almost as if he knew what was coming. As the flight attendants began to prepare for landing, the murmurs around him intensified. Some passengers were still trying to figure him out, while others just couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something off about the whole situation. Was he a millionaire in disguise? Or maybe a celebrity trying to go unnoticed? No one had any clue, but one thing was certain: everyone was talking about him now. As the seatbelt signs flickered on, the man glanced out the window, lost in his own thoughts. For him, this flight was just another day in the life. He wasn't bothered by the whispers or the curious glances. In fact, he was used to it. After all, being underestimated had its perks. It allowed him to move around unnoticed, to blend in when he preferred to stay out of the spotlight. But today was different. Today, he was about to break his silence. When the plane finally touched down, the crew made their usual announcements about preparing to disembark. But instead of standing up with the rest of the passengers, the man calmly pressed a button on the armrest. Moments later, a flight attendant arrived at his seat. Their conversation was brief, but it was enough to cause a ripple of confusion. The attendant's face went from polite professionalism to genuine surprise. As the man rose from his seat, he walked past the rows of passengers, their eyes following him in disbelief. Some whispered to each other, unsure of what they were witnessing. He wasn't just another first-class traveler. He wasn't just another rich guy who could afford a fancy seat. He was someone far more powerful, someone who had the kind of influence that most people could only dream of. But who exactly was he? And why was no one prepared for what was about to unfold? As the man moved toward the exit, a few passengers began to stir in their seats, their curiosity overwhelming their better judgment. They exchanged looks, unsure of what to make of the situation. In a quiet corner, a young woman, Sarah, couldn't help but feel a strange sense of unease. She had been eyeing him since takeoff, but it wasn't just his unassuming appearance that had caught her attention. There was something about the way he carried himself, something almost too calm, too composed for someone who didn't belong. She wasn't the only one who felt it. Across the aisle, a man named James, who had been talking to a colleague about his recent business ventures, suddenly fell silent. He'd been watching the quiet man all flight, the details slowly clicking together in his mind. James was no stranger to the world of power, wealth, and influence. He rubbed shoulders with the rich and famous regularly, but this man, he didn't look like anyone he'd seen before, and yet something about his demeanor was familiar, almost too familiar. James leaned forward, catching the eye of the woman sitting beside him. "Do you know who that guy is?" he whispered, nodding toward the man now nearing the exit. She shook her head, no idea. But he doesn't seem like the typical first-class type, does he? Before James could respond, the man turned sharply, locking eyes with both of them for a brief moment. There was something chilling in his gaze, something that made Sarah shiver. He wasn't just an ordinary passenger, she could feel it. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the man disappeared down the aisle, vanishing behind the flight attendants as they led him to the cockpit door. The air felt thick, the tension palpable. It was as if everyone in the cabin was waiting for something, but none of them knew what. They were all in the dark, but not for much longer. The whispers grew louder, and the questions grew bigger. What was his connection to the airline? Was he a CEO? Or was there something even more dangerous at play? The cabin buzzed with nervous energy as the last few passengers gathered their belongings, each one casting furtive glances toward the cockpit door. The murmurs were now turning into hushed debates. Who do you think he really is? Sarah whispered to her friend, her curiosity now fully piqued. James, who had been stewing in his own thoughts, finally broke his silence. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's big. He looked over at the flight attendants, who were now standing in a group near the cockpit, speaking in low voices. One of them seemed to glance over at him with a look of quiet understanding, before quickly turning away. Then the unthinkable happened. The captain's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, smooth and calm, but there was a slight tremor underneath. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying with us today. Before you exit the aircraft, I'd like to make a special announcement. A pause followed, and the sound of rustling papers filled the silence. We have just landed with one of the most influential figures in aviation on board. He's a man responsible for shaping the future of air travel, and you may not even know it, but you've just shared a flight with him. Sarah's heart raced. She stared at the cockpit door, as if she could somehow will the truth to emerge. The man's identity was a puzzle, but the pieces were starting to fit together. The way the flight attendants had treated him, the hush that fell over the crew when he spoke to them, it all made sense now. But what exactly did he own? Was he the owner of the airline? Before anyone could react, the door to the cockpit opened, and out walked the man, his face now illuminated in the overhead light. His expression was unreadable, but his presence was undeniable. He looked calm, composed, like a man who knew exactly how the next few moments would play out. The entire cabin fell silent, and just as he began to speak, the words hung in the air, hanging over everyone like a storm on the horizon. I think it's time you all knew who I really am. The man's words hung in the air, leaving everyone frozen in place. For a moment, it felt like the entire world had stopped, as if time itself were holding its breath. The passengers waited, eyes locked on him, desperate for the truth that seemed just out of reach. His lips parted, and then, without warning, the cockpit door opened again. But this time, it wasn't just the man stepping forward. A second figure emerged, tall, sharp-eyed, and wearing an air of authority that sent a chill down the spine of everyone in the cabin. This person wasn't a flight attendant or crew member. No, this was someone who clearly belonged in a higher league. Sarah's stomach dropped. She recognized the person immediately, a well-known investor, rumored to hold stakes in several top airlines around the world. The rumors said he had a hand in shaping entire industries, and here he was, standing next to the unassuming man who had caught everyone's attention. What was going on? The new figure, with a cold but calculated look, walked toward the center of the cabin. He locked eyes with the man everyone thought they knew, and with a simple nod, the two exchanged an understanding that no one else could interpret. The tension in the air grew thick, suffocating, as passengers exchanged nervous glances, their suspicions growing darker by the second. What was this secret handshake about? The man in the first-class seat finally spoke, his voice a mix of confidence and something else, a hint of mystery that only deepened the confusion. You're all in the dark, but not for long. What you're about to find out will change the way you think about the airline industry, forever. Suddenly, the doors to the plane were locked, and the familiar hum of the engines rolled back to life. The ground crew outside was motionless, and for the first time, everyone realized they weren't done flying yet. The real journey was just beginning. The plane's engines rolled to life, but there was a stillness in the cabin, a heaviness that no one could shake off. The man in the first-class seat turned to face the passengers once again, his expression now sharp, intense, like a man who had been waiting for this very moment his entire life. The new figure standing beside him, the investor everyone feared, seemed to nod in approval. Whatever was happening, it was too big for any of them to fully comprehend. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man began, his voice cutting through the tension, "I am the owner of this airline, and this," he gestured toward the investor, "is my business partner." A few gasps rippled through the crowd as the truth began to sink in. He wasn't just some random traveler. He was the mastermind behind the entire operation. But there was more. The man's eyes narrowed, and his tone grew even more serious. "What you don't know is that the airline is on the brink of a massive shift. What we're about to do, in the next few minutes, will alter the entire course of aviation. You've been part of something monumental today, and you won't even realize it until the world starts to change around you." The words hung in the air like a promise, one that none of them could fully grasp. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But there's one final thing you need to understand. The power you've witnessed isn't just mine, it's shared." Just as the last word left his mouth, a loud, jarring noise echoed from the back of the plane. The lights flickered, and the passengers screamed as the plane lurched violently to the side, sending everyone into a panic. A figure appeared in the back of the cabin, silhouetted against the emergency lights, and the real shock hit. The man everyone thought was the owner wasn't actually in charge at all. The real owner had been watching the entire time, hidden in plain sight. And the power struggle was only just beginning. The plane's violent jolt sent passengers scrambling, clutching armrests and each other as the emergency lights flashed wildly. Fear spread like wildfire, but amidst the chaos, one truth became undeniable. The stakes were much higher than anyone had imagined. The figure standing at the back of the cabin slowly stepped forward, revealing a familiar face that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. It was the flight attendant who had been serving drinks earlier, the one who had kept a watchful eye on everyone, the one who seemed to know more than she let on. But now, her calm demeanor was replaced with a steely resolve that caught everyone off guard. "You've all been part of a test," she said, her voice steady despite the pandemonium. A test to see who could handle the truth. The man who had introduced himself as the airline owner looked visibly shaken. He stepped back, clearly not prepared for the sudden turn of events. The investor beside him remained silent, his cold eyes darting between the flight attendant and the passengers, a realization dawning upon him as well. It was clear now. The flight attendant wasn't just another employee. She was the mastermind behind the operation, the real force pulling the strings. "As for you all," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the stunned passengers, "you're part of a much larger picture. What you've witnessed today is just the beginning of a revolution in air travel. The power you've seen is not just in ownership, it's in control of information, connections, and perception." The plane began to steady, the turbulence subsiding as the flight attendants regained control. The passengers slowly came to terms with the gravity of what had just transpired. As they disembarked, the world outside seemed unchanged, but each person left the plane with the undeniable knowledge that they had just glimpsed something far bigger than themselves. The truth was out there, but some mysteries were never meant to be solved. The next flight would be different, and they would never see air travel, or the world, quite the same again.